I'm delighted to launch the Change Intelligence Research Series. So for many research reports, it's based on survey data from end users or a limited set of data. But our research series is different. We analyse and scan 50,000 orgs a month. And that means we analyse 1.3 billion of metadata items. And therefore we have a huge volume of data to start to look at from a research perspective. So what we do is we take that data, we anonymise it, we harmonise it, and then we analyse it. And the first research report is going to look at user experience. So I'm delighted to introduce Sari Lazinski, our VP of Product, and Steffi Hogan, Director of User Experience at Red Argyle, a Salesforce consulting firm. They authored the first report and are going to take you through some of the findings.
Welcome to our webinar on unleashing a lovable user experience in Salesforce, which Steffi, this is pretty much what you're all about, isn't it?
Yeah, no, this is user experience is especially important in Salesforce. So this was a really fun one to work on.
And this is actually our first, the webinar around our first report, which is the untapped opportunities in user experience. If you haven't downloaded the report or read the report, you can scan this QR code and download it, well, either right now or later if you open the page, because we plan to do more more reports in the future. That's also a great way to kind of almost subscribe to be aware of future editions. And very quickly, before we get into discussing the data and the trends, where's the data coming from? We are at Elements, our Change Intelligence platform, and we actually scan a lot of orgs. We do about 50,000 org scans every month. And actually in January, we scanned over 1.3 billion metadata components. So we have a lot of insights about, the orgs that we sync, and purely anonymizing the data and just querying our database for the right insights. We were able to find some aggregate statistics about this particular dimension. All righty. So we will get into the details, and this webinar is an opportunity for me and Steph to talk a bit deeper about some of the findings and best practices, because we were only able to put so many words on the page. But the general findings of the report were that page layouts, especially on standard objects, are way too complex for effective decision making, and dynamic forms actually are still severely underutilized to where it should be. So let's get over the detail. So
Yeah.
I remember you said you're not particularly, you're both surprised and not surprised. But for everyone, we looked at over 20,000 page layouts, and we found that on average, there's about 35 plus fields on every page on page layouts, which doesn't seem to be that bad, although you have an opinion on that. But then when you look at standard objects alone, that raises up almost up to 80 on average. Your face says it all, but do elaborate your feelings.
My face gets me in trouble a lot, by the way. Yeah, so I have very strong feelings about how many inputs you show to a user at any given time, right? Oh gosh, where do I start? So 78 is just mind-bogglingly horrible. 35 to me is, none of these numbers work, right? The page layouts, it doesn't surprise me at all, because we're just used to using Salesforce a certain way. And if you aren't used to thinking about the user or the people that you're building it for, it's just not going to occur to you to say, oh, maybe I shouldn't have this many forms showing all at once, or inputs showing all at once. And the standard objects, they come with all the default stuff on it. And then instead of taking things off, you just add to it as you go. And you're like, oh, we need this, we need this, we need this. And it goes on and on and on and on. So that doesn't surprise me at all. I wish I could say it did. The ideal number of inputs, is 7 at any given time in front of the eyeballs of the person using it. And that's where dynamic forms comes in, right? So like you could have 35 fields on one page layout, but if they're shown dynamically, awesome. If they're shown at the same time, not awesome. So it all depends. I should have worn my It Depends t-shirt today.
When you shared that insight, 7, no more than 7 inputs at any given time, and you mentioned, well, none of these numbers are good. I remember thinking to myself, poor salespeople, because when you look at the data broken down by the specific standard objects, on average, and this is slightly inaccurate chart actually, but on average, opportunity has 154 plus fields on its page layouts, and account is way over 100, and contact is nearly 100. So I'm going, oh, and why do we give? Pardon my friend. Why do we give shit to salespeople for not filling it all the data if we're making it really, really difficult for them?
Yeah, you go into an opportunity page and you have 150 things staring you down, and they're not all organized in any kind of way, or only barely organized. You're not going to want to spend the time to go find the things you actually need to fill out. I've heard of people just hitting save, and then whatever comes up is required, then they go find the fields that they need to fill out instead of trying to do it quickly or efficiently.
By the way, there's Sri Tella who asked a question regarding your 7 inputs total rule.
This is a good question.
Is it should be 7 input fields or only 7 fields in total, irrelevant of what fields they are? So
no, actually, that is a really good question. Now, 7 is a really good guideline. There may be times when it's better to have a couple more, depending on what it is you're asking for. When you display a chunk of fields, they should all be related. So chunk 1 is related. They make sense to be at that step. They are exactly what the user needs to put in at that step and no more. Don't ask for extra information that isn't technically actually needed at that moment. There are other ways to get people to come back and fill out other fields that aren't required. So if you have address fields, obviously a lot of those have more than 7 fields because addresses get really complicated, especially when you throw in different countries and things. So you're probably going to have more than 7, but it's just the address stuff that you're asking for. That's the chunk you're looking at.
But I just, on that note, I've just realized, and it only hit me when you've been saying those things, the number of sites where, to your point, I'm not American, I don't live in America, and yet I'm required to fill in fields which are for Americans, like zip code, which I don't know what that is.
Yeah,
but thankfully it does accept other inputs, is actually more often than not. And
yes.
And I'm thinking, obviously this is maybe, I suppose if you're using like Experience Cloud with your end user stuff like that, yeah, like if you're asking them to fill out all those fields which are not relevant to all the people in all countries, then that's a really bad experience.
Yeah, and I think that goes right to the personalization that Salesforce is capable of, and the audiences you can set up, and dynamic forms to show to specific types of people at certain times can all solve so much of that and make you look better as a company, more put together and professional as well. Oh, see, Buckley Smith, quick actions or screen flows are a great way to group small amounts of fields that are required in a particular context. What are my thoughts? And I just love that you brought up screen flows because they're brilliant. I mean, they are so incredibly useful. You can do so much with it. Just having a nicely built conditional, whatever, so many different things you can do with them. So put that on maybe an opportunity stage instead of having your typical fields. And then you can like automate all kinds of stuff. It's not just the fact that you have fewer fields. It's just so powerful that screen flows are a fantastic way to go. I mean, in UX, right? I'm a designer. I love designing things, right? So my meat and potatoes, personally, if I could live in Experience Cloud my entire career, I would be happy. But in reality, not everybody has Experience Cloud. Not everybody can afford Experience Cloud. that doesn't mean that Lex or, back in regular old Salesforce, it doesn't mean it has to be crappy. So as UX designers, we can do some declarative user experience design and work with screen flows and dynamic fields and page layouts and things like that. Yeah, love it.
So
Yes.
we will definitely get more into more discussions about Lightning pages in a moment. We have one anonymous attendee who asked actually a very interesting question. For some industries and use cases, users need more information. Collapsible sections have traditionally been the way to keep those organized. What is your view on the usefulness of dynamic sections in Lightning layouts? I suppose it's well, sometimes you need more than 7 fields. So surely it's better to just kind of open and close the stuff that you need.
Right. Opening and dynamic accordion type ones, it's not a bad way to go. And if you're going through a thought process of this is a crawl, walk, run process, and for anybody who's not familiar with the crawl, walk, run, so run is your most ideal utopic state, and then you got to figure out how to get there. And that could be crawl and walk. That's perfectly fine. Could it be better? Yeah, it could be better, but that's a good place to start. Having the related fields chunked together neatly within those sections. And again, 7 is a guideline, not a hard and fast rule that, rules are made to be broken anyway. But don't go putting 35 on paint, please. Yeah.
Well, so let's talk about maybe the cost and implications of all of that. And in the report, you actually said, when we look at these numbers and complexity of user interface in Salesforce, we could get into the cognitive overload, data quality, user adoption, but we could get into that another time. That's a bigger conversation. Well, this is the other time.
Well, here we are.
We can get into that conversation. So why don't you kind of expand for everyone listening, like what is the relationship between what is cognitive overload? What does it actually mean?
Let's start with that. Everybody here will understand if you don't already understand those terms, you will feel it really hardcore when I explain it. Cognitive overload is when your brain is being inundated with a million different things all at once, and you just can't focus or figure out what to focus on primarily. There are all kinds of situations, like you're a stay-at-home parent and the kids are sick, and the one over here is just throwing a tantrum, and the dog needs to be fed, and the phone is ringing, and now the food on the stove's on fire. That kind of hectic stress that your brain feels. It's the same.
It's what I call Tuesday. Continue.
It's what you call Tuesday. Yeah. Any day that ends in Y, I think, would qualify. But so you don't want to overload your users, and you easily do that if you put too much on the screen at any given time. When you're presenting, if you have a slide that's just chock full of words and you're talking at the same time, just those 2 things can overload your audience's brain. That's just 2 things, because they're trying to read and they're trying to listen to you at the same time. So that's, we got to be respectful of our users' thought processes, because they need them to do some important things. And if we slow them down, we're done, right? If you cognitively overload a human, they are not going to want to use that system if that's what it does to them all the time, right? They'd rather do armchair, the swivel chair thing, because they know the system well, and it doesn't make their brain go, oh my God. So your user adoption is going to be low. If they do use it and they just want to get through the task, oh my God, I just need to get this done, get me out of this. They might just put in fields that's kind of like fake, not true data, and think, okay, I'll come back and fix this later, but I just need to get this step done now, and I can't move forward unless I enter this in. So it's a balancing act, right? You got to figure out what they need to put in, give it to them piece by piece in manageable bite-sized chunks so that they can get on with their day and be really productive. And then suddenly everybody's using your tool, and it's a beautiful world.
And I think there's an expression that one of my colleagues uses a lot. A confused mind says no. which I
Yeah.
think summarizes that cognitive overload.
Yeah.
So
And I'm, and most people think in terms of uh neurotypical brains who aren't living with disabilities or anything. And when you get into that whole area, which is like 20% of the population, is pretty big. I mean, it's even harder for them as well. So
sorry, could you expand on that? 20, because I'm actually not aware of that.
Oh.
20% of the population is what?
is living with a disability of some kind, a permanent disability. And same goes for being neurodivergent. And that's how our brains all work differently, right? ADHD, dyslexia, all that kinds of different ways that our brains are like, yeah, I'm going to do this, but not this well. So when we design, typically regular design, if you don't take all of that into consideration, you've got a large chunk of people who work for you who are going to even have like a doubly hard time using your tool. So, it benefits everybody to start thinking.
It almost, now that you've explained the cognitive overload, it almost seems obvious that if that's what it is, then obviously it will hurt adoption, and obviously it will hurt data quality, because if you're confused, if you slow down, you will either not use the tool or use it incorrectly or get confused. So it almost seems it's quite interesting, right? Because we talk a lot in our industry about, oh, you have problem with poor data quality, every Salesforce org ever, and therefore we should get these tools that will help you clean this up and after the fact. And it seems like actually if you did better job
The beginning
at the beginning, that you wouldn't actually have that problem in the first place, or at least it will be minimized.
And that's a big problem I think a lot of companies face, right? So they're starting a new org, or they need to fix their current org and they just want to get it done. And they don't think, I need a user experience person to help out with this, because normally people think that's an added expense. But if you think about it from the lens of, we make the user experience really easy to use up front because we have these people who literally do this as their job. Down the road, it's going to save a ton of money. People will get, it's efficiency, user adoption, the data quality, all of it is going to be 100% better. If you just start it from the very, very beginning, start thinking that way.
So on the topic of user adoption data quality, I've actually thought it might be good to demonstrate quantify this a little bit. And I did some interesting digging, but rather than looking how much of the stuff that people put in Salesforce isn't being used, I've asked myself, if we look at just it was very limited so far, like on the custom objects and custom fields, not installed through managed package, just created by admins and people. So some effort was spent on meetings, on emails, on Slacks, on replying to those, having a stakeholder approval thing, building the thing, deploying the thing. If we look at all those custom objects and custom fields, which were only created last year in a span of 12 months, last year, 2023, and what percentage, as of pretty much early March, had no usage whatsoever. I'm talking 0 records. So like for fields, not 10% or 1 or 10 fields, records filled out. I mean 0 records where the field was used at all. And for objects, not 10 or 100 records, but 0 records. No records were ever logged for those objects, because it seemed like a very sensible threshold, because you can have some objects where you expect them to be used only once in a blue moon.
Yeah.
But 0 is 0 is 0 probably.
Why do you even have it?
Yeah. So I think you saw kind of the slides before, but would you like to wager a guess?
Oh gosh, I know the wait, we're talking about the number that had 0 things on it.
Let's put it recent custom stuff, objects and fields specifically, that were put into org that were never used. 0, nil, zilch, nada.
Gosh. 40%, 50. I'm going to go 50%. That's my final answer.
You're almost right. So for custom fields, it was 45.1. And for objects, custom objects, this excludes managed package objects, just to be clear, and standard stuff. This custom stuff you had to build, 32.7%. The threshold being 0 versus 1 record. And now I think that's to your point, right? About, I'm not saying necessarily, user experience wouldn't necessarily solve all of that, but it will probably solve a whole lot of that, because if that's how much stuff we end up working on that ends up not having business impact, not being adopted, to your point, that people sometimes don't appreciate they think, oh, it's maybe too much effort to make Salesforce nice for the end users, right? Like, who cares? But that's almost the cost. If you don't build the things that are useful and intuitive to users, then you're going to spend a lot of money on activities that, like, if you took vacation, that would have had exact same impact on the business as you maybe deploying those objects and fields, right?
And just as useful.
How big is that?
that oh my gosh, it hurts my brain, because it makes me a little angry. On behalf of the users and all of that meeting time spent. That hurts. That could be solved so easily.
And someone must be thinking, well, we've added that field, we've put it on that page layout, like 50 scrolls down, it's there. Why aren't they using it? Let's move on to Lightning pages, or dynamic pages specifically. So for this, we were actually looking at, we look at record Lightning pages even more specifically. So it was just over 11,000. And we kind of, these are also pages which weren't utilizing like the component, which is like the page layout component, where people tried to build, build the dynamic page almost from scratch, which probably is the best practice, I would say. And this is actually interesting, because I'm not sure that whether after everything we've discussed, this is something we would agree on anymore. I remember saying that about 60% of record Lightning pages seemed to be underused because they had less than 5 fields, I believe. But actually, this would actually, in your book, be, well, that's probably a good page if it has only 5, 6, 7 fields.
But if they're underused, then what's the point?
Yes. Yes. Well, the other interesting thing was, we looked at, the dynamic pages, how many actually use filters, because that's the whole thing about dynamic forms. Is what makes them dynamic is the fact that you can make any component, whether that's a screen flow, a related list, a report, fields, field sections, pretty much tabs, you name it, you can make it completely conditional on on things, on the status of the record, on other fields, on your roles, pick list values, profile of the user, right? So you and I could be looking at an account page and seeing completely different things depending on our roles, our profiles, combination of both of them, the status of the account and region, territory, whatever. And it looked like only less than 20% had any filters at all. About 10% had field filters. But as far as kind of more, I'm going to say, not even complex, advanced role, pick list, record type, kind of, going beyond just a field, it was just 8.9. So not that many dynamic of looking across those 11,000 plus dynamic forms, not that much dynamic behavior, is there?
No, that's so sad. There's so much opportunity there, not to be confused with opportunity pages. You know what I think is interesting, and I'm going to give a shout out to a person on my team. Her name's Alexis. She's a user researcher, and she's really smart. I tasked her with trying to figure out what would be like an ideal layout for, I threw one out there for the opportunity page, like just under a certain circumstance, what would the ideal be? And she went for a while. She came back. She's like, yeah, I think honestly, I'm going to recommend that the ideal starting point for the opportunity page is nothing. Like, start from a blank page and then only add what you need. And I said, that's a great answer. And then we do have challenges, right? Salesforce puts stuff on there by default, makes us have certain things. So that's challenging, but I think it's a great concept. It's a good way to think about it.
But I also think, to your point, what I really love about dynamic pages is that if you really embrace them, you can, the world's your oyster almost. Like you can really start from scratch. And a lot of our friends like Michael, when we showed them the numbers around the opportunity being the most complex subject, remember his reaction was, there's literally no surprise there at all, because what happens is it's one of those objects which gets used by every department. From finance uses it, sales uses it, marketing uses it, customer success uses it, product even uses it. I can attest to that as a product person. So when we want some specific attributes which are unique to us, or like insights which people just keep adding them, so that the normal page layout probably is a combination of what every person in every role would ever want to know about this record at any given time. And with Dynamic, you can actually go, we could all be staring at the same record and see just the stuff that's
Just what
relevant
stuff
to
we
us.
need. Yes.
Just when we need it, at the stage when we need it.
Exactly. Like, yeah, because when you're in stage A and I need to see, 3 things, but when we get down further and we're in stage M or whatever, I need a different set of data, or the first set plus the second set of data. I can make it do that. And I don't need to see 800 fields, which would really honestly just make me get up and walk away from my computer and have some coffee because I would need it. We're doing our users a huge disservice by not taking advantage of these really cool functions in Salesforce.
And just for those who might not have seen this in action, this is not maybe the most beautiful example, but I've once designed kind of a for fun actually a record for internal staff and their life cycle, from being recruited to onboarded to trained to just manage as an employee. And it was very simple how basically just by simply changing the status of the life cycle of a person joining the business, you could, hey, here are onboarding tasks, which are only relevant if they're being onboarded. And once they're done, they're done. And now you're into training, and you can just imagine all those related lists, because pretty much for every status, there was a different related list or even screen flows at times. If you had all of that all at once, how better of an experience that would be.
Yeah.
Anyway, Steffi, as you're the expert, I'm only a very passionate amateur. On a scale of 1 to 10, what score would you give me for that dynamic?
For that, I mean, it's an interview. Knowing what that process is, without doing user research or anything, I would give you a solid 9 out of 10 on that, just to leave room for improvement in case, because that's the way it should be used.
That means a lot coming.
I mean, when you have a little checklist, a dynamic checklist for people, that just gets me right there. I'm like, oh, yeah. Awesome. Or imagine all of the check marks being all of them, and someone coming in and going, oh God, when do I have to this?
It's almost no point
done by.
It's almost no point hiring someone if I have to click so many things, right?
Yeah. The related lists and fields is a reason for lightning is slow adoption headwind.
You said it.
Yep.
By the way, this is I know a lot of people often talk about their Salesforce being slow, but if that's the point, right? Also, that's another thing. If you have to fetch all of this data all at once, not even in the related tab, sometimes just have all the related lists with your page all in your face, right? Like, yeah, what do you expect? Oh, like, what should happen?
Yeah, no one has time for that.
Yeah. So, what would be? I think what we're seeing from the report is people, there are some dynamic forms. They're either very much underutilized, and even if they're utilized, they're not very dynamic, most of them, or at least definitely underutilized for what is possible. Yeah. And we have a lot of page layouts, and they're all mostly overcomplicated. So if we were to leave people viewing this with some practical tips on how to get started with lighting experience, or dynamic experience even, to be more precise, and embrace it, embrace the UX revolution in Salesforce. Where should they start?
Where to start? I mean, talk to your users. I know a lot of people already do that, but actually talk to them and sit with them, see how they work. If you have like an hour to sit with them as they do a task or whatever, even 15 minutes, you'll have a lot more understanding of what they go through just by sitting there watching them try to struggle through something. Once you have an idea of what would really work well for that person in that type of role, then you have, okay, so this role would generally need this. And then chunk up your information into small bits that are related to whatever makes the most sense. It's different for everybody. Whenever you see they convert this to dynamic, whatever in the Lightning page, just say yes to the dress and click the button. Make it dynamic. I mean, it's not going to change anything immediately except for giving you more functionality. Then you can go in and make magic happen. And as a designer first and a Salesforce admin about 7th on that list, and I can say this, it's really not that hard. You just have to know a couple things, just learn a few basics and you'll be able to get in there and work with it.
So I have a question for you, because I have again, amateur opinion. Do you think it would be, because you can approach it from two ways, right? You have all these objects, standard and custom, most of them still on page layouts, and moving to dynamic it's going to be a process. It's things you do, like, in phases, iteratively. It's not a big bang type of thing. So the argument goes, you could either start from the low-hanging fruit, maybe some of those custom objects we saw that on average have 20 to 30 fields. So the things aren't as bad as an opportunity. Start from there and then work your way up. But I would actually argue, I feel like you should really take the bull by the horns and really start from the opportunities, the accounts, like really start from where I think the pain is the biggest.
Yeah. What's going to make the most impact, right? So one of the things that I like to practice is, doing that. There's the 4-grid system thingy, right? Like this. And one axis is effort and the other axis is impact. And so you figure out what things you can do, what's going to have the most impact for the least amount of effort, right? And go through that kind of prioritization workshop. And Bruce, start where the most impact can be derived. Yeah, because you want your user adoption to go up really fast. I mean, in this day and age, we need people being efficient, so they can just rock their jobs and not have to sit there frustrated and angry because the tool sucks. So whatever has the most impact that you can feasibly do it.
Someone asked a very important question, Jeff Hemming. This is awesome. Came away with a lot of ideas. Thank you. Challenge: how do you position with management? How do you sell this? Brilliant question. And personally, if I may, I would go back to this chart right there, which will be one of the charts we will be publishing, one of the next reports, either March or April. This is across 100 different orgs, production orgs. And this is not how much stuff, how many custom fields are not used and how many custom objects are not used in general. This is how many that were built in recent time, in last year, still are not being used a few months into 2024. So at the very least, even if you build all of that in December, you at least had last 2 months or 3 months at this point to use it. And these are some staggering numbers. So I think in a lot of times, companies treat their Salesforce teams as maybe a fixed cost. But if you start putting it into management, that 20, 30, 40% of whatever we do, people talk about having a 4-day work week. You could go, we can have 3-day work week and do much less, and it would probably make little difference.
Yeah.
to the business, because if that much of our time and effort is wasted, and by the way, let's be honest, it's not like most admins or BAs or architects kind of just go, oh, you know what would be really cool if I would add these fields to a no. It usually starts with some some business user having a very usually sensible request that they want to see something or do something. So if we build the stuff they ask for and it ends up not being used, we have to ask ourselves, have we made it virtually impossible for them to use what they really wanted?
Yeah. I mean, talking to management, some of the things that you need to drive home, and all the situations are different, but I'm just going to pick on call centers for, support for a second. If you could shave 10 seconds off of every support call that comes in a week, and you're a high volume support center, that adds up really fast. And also, everybody has the dream projects, the things that they really want to be working on to make either the company better, their customers happier, sell more, whatever. And they have great ideas and they don't have time to work on them because they're spending 20 hours a week building custom objects that never get used. And in meetings to plan those, you got to consider all of that. And it's tricky getting management and leadership. Sometimes it's very tricky to get them on the right page. You just got to find out what resonates with them the most. If it's efficiency, if it's user adoption, whatever is their pain point, that's what you go after. That's how you frame everything. If I need user adoption to go up because my KPI for this year is, or whatever, my objective for this year in my role, I have to increase user adoption by 20%. And then I get cranky at everybody who, well, why aren't we doing it? You go to that person and say, I understand you need to get user adoption up. This is how you can do it.
And by the way, there's something interesting about what you said, because I've seen, and we've done this internally. You can have an org which on the very high level shows healthy adoption. You have daily logins, or every week, everyone who has a license logs in. And you go, yeah, 100% adoption. But then, like, if you start looking, with our platform, you can do that on each object. Like, for every object, how is it being used? When was it last used? How much data do we have? How much data is being added? And then you can classify, show me stuff used by the product team versus sales team versus service. You can then start drilling into how much of the capability they're actually using. And actually, our VP of operations one did this study, and I was happy. My group, we were like 95% adoption of whatever we were given, but we have other team which was at about 20%. So 80% of whatever went to supporting them, they never used, right? So adoption is not. It's a tricky thing to measure. Actually,
it really is.
You need to get really granular. There's actually a question first from Buckley. Any suggestions for ideal design documentation for dynamic pages, Steffi?
Ideal design documentation for dynamic. Actually, we're working on that now. So we're still researching it right now so that we can write up some recommendations for it, because I mean, that's a hard one to nail down because there are so many different situations. Dynamic fields.
I have a very salesy answer.
Oh, please go ahead.
Well, arguably, I would say the best would be to use our platform. And the reason I say that is two things, because we do capture and analyze dependencies between metadata, but we also do it very granularly. So for lighting pages specifically, we wouldn't just say this field is used in a dynamic page, period. We would say it's used 3 times in 3 separate filters in these components. So like because that's one thing is, if you look at dynamic pages, I can also understand why some people might be hesitant to make them really, really powerful, because then you're dealing with something like a very complex flow, in the sense that it then becomes quite a challenge to to make sure you don't break it. But if you have automatic dependency mapping, which says, okay, this is how it works, this is all the filters. If you're going to change values in this field, there are at least 3 different filters you're going to need to change on that. Okay, that actually helps you, makes it manageable. The other thing, but I'm actually interested to hear your thoughts on that, Steffi, around kind of design documentation, because one is that's more management after the fact, knowing how it's configured, technical documentation, automated in this case.
Yeah.
But I found, and I once wrote a short article for Salesforce Ben, that I like business process mapping as a way of capturing what users need to do and need to have access to at any given point, and use that as a reference point for my Lightning page design. Have you used something similar in the past?
Yeah. And it's a brilliant idea, because you also have to remember that users aren't just the users, they're also stakeholders, are also users in some way. Right. And knowing the dependencies alone, that's a really important one, because we could go in and start removing things from the whatever, and suddenly we break everything because, well, that was something else needed that over there. We didn't know it. That would definitely go in my design documentation for recommendations in the future. If you decide to do anything, please make sure. Right. Oh gosh, we have three questions in Q&A. John says, have you ever separated out records information into separate tabs? For example, a default tab on opportunity with 5 to 8 dynamic fields filtered on stage, and additional tabs with the record detail? Yes, I have. That's actually a really good way to handle it, because if you're not on an opportunity, you have that whole top of the page. That's the beautiful prime real estate, where you put the most important things, like the vital information. But then underneath, because somebody's always going to want to see something different or something that isn't part of the main process. Yeah, tabs across the bottom, organize them nicely. Beautiful solution. Love it.
I think I'll take this one. Can you elaborate on how you assess whether a component is used or not? So for that particular chart that they've shown, this was, we looked at, because that's one of the things that our platform analyzes for users, which is for every field, on how many records was this filled out across record types or in general. For objects, how many records, again, by record type as well. Last time record was created or modified, some other adoption insights. So all I did was actually looked at all custom objects and custom fields in that random selection of 100 production orgs created from January 1st last year to December 31st last year. And I went 0. So it was literal 0. I thought every field, like you could have, there are some caveats to that, right? So you can have pick list values, which have empty as the default option, which is sensible. You have a checkbox, an unselected checkbox is still a valid answer. So there's a good argument to be made that the 45% of null values, if you were actually to go down to take away some of these cases where null value is acceptable and is valid, this will probably go down a couple of percentage points, maybe down to 40, high 30s, sure. For custom objects, it was, again, like how many ended up having 0 records, not 1, not 10, not 2% across 2 million records, like 0 records, period. And that's, again, how the number was derived. Because I give this example, you can have an object which you use for something bad, like how many break-ins did we have, or how many incidents on production, and we have
0 is good.
Yeah, and we pretty much, we haven't had any records in a couple of years. That's good. The fact that 0 is actually great business metric. So if you were to put any number other than 0, you get into whole bunch of conversations. And I thought to myself, 0 seems like a very defensible threshold for the most part. So yeah, and sure, that's how the number was derived. Considering that, Salesforce, especially dynamic forms, are actually, it's the declarative development experience, right? You drag and drop, click, you don't code anything. And for what it's worth, dynamic forms are actually extremely simple to use, and the filtering logic it is to me at least kind of self-evident. Isn't there an argument to be made that actually this is already something baked in every admin's almost lifestyle, right? Sandbox production. Why not just build it, show it to stakeholders on the sandbox, get them to use it in real scenario?
If you have the capability of doing so, 100,000%, yes, build it out. Because I know not everybody has the knowledge to do so, but if you have the knowledge to do so, please make a working prototype just to show it off, because that's when you're going to get the most buy-in. You blow someone's socks off with a simple little screen flow, then you just changed like 1,000 people's lives or something like that. It's super impactful to actually show something interactive that works. Yes.
So thank you for attending this Change Intelligence Research Series. Thank you also to Sari Lazinski and Steph Hogan for presenting the findings. You can download a copy of the report that they've been talking about by using this QR code, and also subscribe to future reports as they come out.